Hello guys, Eugen here. Welcome to an InDesign tutorial. When we build grids, we can never be sure if the width of the column or measure will be wide enough to accommodate the optimal line length. Measure is determined by InDesign through a process called subtraction. Before we jump to the practical construction of the grid, we need to clarify some important design variables. Measure is the width of the column, while line length, that is often confused with measure, represents how many words or characters a line can accommodate. Line length is a function of the point size. Point size is the size of the characters. Measure and point size are married together. If we change the settings for one, the other one will suffer or will feel the joy too. For demonstration purposes, I'll use an A4 page and Times New Roman for body copy. From New Document, we select the A4 page. We change the units to points. 2 pages, start at page 2, facing pages. Do you remember I told you earlier that measure is determined through subtraction? If I would accept the default margin values and I'll change the number of columns to 3, InDesign will calculate the measure for us. Here is how the measure is calculated. From the width of the page, InDesign will subtract the side margins plus the gutters. 2 times 36 plus 2 times 12 is 96. InDesign will subtract from the width of the page 96 points, leaving us with the width of all 3 columns without any gutters. To find out how wide is just one column, we have to divide this number by 3. But I don't want to let InDesign to make this decision for me, because the measure might not be suitable for the typeface and the point size I use. So I will zero out the margins, and then in layout, margin and columns, I'll set the number of columns back to 1. The aspect ratio of an A4 page is 1 to 1.5. I'll further round up this aspect ratio to 1 to 1.5. The number of columns I want to have is 12. 12 is a flexible number which will allow us to have layouts with 2, 3 and 4 columns. To find out the number of rows, I will divide 12 by 1.5 and I get 8 rows. To calculate the right measure for Times New Roman, we should take a look at the width of its characters. Times New Roman was designed to have narrow characters to compose well on the short lines of a newspaper. As we can see here, Times New Roman have narrower characters than Sabon, a typeface with standard width characters. Having narrower characters, lines set in Times New Roman will look longer and even crowded than they really are. To determine the measure, I prefer to use a ratio-based solution. The ideal ratio between point size and measure is between 1 to 1.5 and 2 to 2.5. For Times New Roman, I'll use a ratio of 1 to 2. First, I'll change the units from points to picas, and then in the width field of the text frame, I'll multiply our point size by 2. Our measure is now 20 picas long, and the line length is around 9 to 10 words, which will make the reading experience comfortable. For the moment, our text is set solid, 10 by 10 points. To determine how much extra data is necessary, I'll use a mathematical approach as well. 20 picas divided by 10, our point size, leaves us with 2 points, which I'll add to our 10 points leading value. Knowing the leading value, we can determine the width of the gutters. I'll duplicate the columns, leaving no space between them. I'll open the Align panel, and in Distribute Spacing, at the bottom of the panel, I'll set the space to 12 points. At this stage, we can find out the size of the type area. Being a multi-column document, the type area will have minimum 2 columns. The width here is 41 picas, or 492 points. I will draw a rectangle which has 492 points. To find out the height of the type area, we first need to decide how many lines should have one row. If we plan to have 6 lines per row, the height will be 8 times 6 plus 7 lines gutter, which means the height of the type area is 55 lines. 55 lines multiplied by 12 points is 660 points. This is the height of the type area. To find out the margins, I need to subtract the size of the type area from the A4 page. To do this, I need to open the document setup dialog box. I'll subtract 492 from the width of the page and 660 from its height. I retain these numbers and then, in layout, margin and columns, I'll insert these values. 181.89 here and 103.276 in this field. The top margin I want to be 5 lines tall. 5 times 12, it's 60 points. To find out the bottom margin, we need to subtract 60 from this value. I want the outside margin to be wide enough to prevent the content from being covered by the thumbs. If I subtract 60 points from this number, I'll get the size of the inside margin. Now, because I have all the margins set up, I can define the grid layout and delete this frame. In Layout, Create Guides, I'll specify 8 rows and 12 columns. The gutter size will remain 12 points because it's the value of our body copy. The final step is to display the baseline grid. In View Options, I'll press the baseline grid, but as you can see here, it is not displayed correctly. I need to make a few adjustments in Preferences, Grids, Baseline Grid. I'll change the color from blue to light gray. Start at 0, relative to top margin, and increment every 12 points. Now the grid is done, and as you can see here, the baseline grids are synchronizing with our brow gutters. If you want to go deeper with grids, I recommend you these two books: InDesign Type by Nigel French and Grid System by Joseph Muller-Brockman. You'll find here lots of information to sharpen even more your grid skills. Thank you all for watching.